My name is Sean Elrington. I'm a technical specialist with ACL Services. Today we're going to take about 10 minutes to take a look at some ways you can use ACL to test healthcare data. Specifically, we're going to go and check some vendor files to see if any of our vendors have been included in the Office of Inspector General's excluded provider list. We'll also be checking a million-row table to see if there are any HCFA diagnostic group codes that are inappropriate. Also try and identify any accounts that have unusually high outstanding balances. I'm going to Alt-Tab over to ACL right now. Our first step in testing our vendor list to see if anybody is on the OIG excluded providers list is to actually go and get the OIG list. That's available from a number of sources. A website is the most common place to get it. Once you've downloaded that, you can bring that data into ACL by using our data definition wizard. The OIG list comes as a DB2 file, DBF file, DBase compatible. ACL understands this, and so it can read the metadata, so I don't have to do any additional work now to define this data for ACL. It comes on in there 43,966 records. So I'd like to find if there are any relationships between this data and my vendor list. The easiest and quickest way to do this is to create a relationship. I'm going to press a button labeled relationship, and I'm going to add that table that has the excluded providers to this view. I can take vendor name, which is character data, and I can see if that's the same thing as business name. Now that I've created this relationship, I can add columns to my table that can come from either one of those tables. So if I go and have a look at the updated table now, I can add the business name. And as we scroll down, we can just see that there are 3 matches. If there were many vendors, it wasn't easy to scroll down and just visually inspect it, I can apply a filter. I can say, for the business name column, I just want to find everything where that business name is not blank. So not is blank. Find the right field. And so if the business name column is not blank, show me just those records. And so we do find that we have a match here between 3 of our vendors and 3 vendors that are listed on the OIG excluded providers list. If I want to share this information with another ACL user, it's very easy to save just these 3 records as an ACL table. I can also export this data out as any one of a number of data types if I needed to forward this information on to somebody else in the organization who wasn't using ACL. Our next test is going to use a very large master table, and we're going to go and look for some very specific HCFA DRG codes. As you can see, this is a very large table. Down at the bottom, we can see there's 1,139,040 records. So this is not a table that we'd be able to analyze using a spreadsheet. We have to use a tool like ACL that has no file size limitations. And we can see there's a column in our data for HCFA. There's 3 specific codes I'd like to isolate today, 300, 310, and 520. So I'm going to apply another filter to do that. The filter I'm going to use in this case is called match. And we also have a not button, so I'm easily able to use the inverse of any of these filters just by adding not to it. So if I match the field value that I want to look for the match in, and then the specific test that I want to match. Because it looks like numbers, but this is actually character data, so that's why I have to enclose this in quotes so ACL understands that it's not actually looking for a true number. And as always, I can verify the expression is correct. And that's because we have a mischaracter in here. And if we apply that, ACL will go through the million records and just isolate the ones that have those codes we were looking for. We can count how many records there are. And we can see there are quite a few of them that just have codes. The last test we're going to perform today is to go and use this same table to go and see if we can find any accounts that have unusually high balances. As we can see from our HCFA test, there were actually only 2,000 records out of the 1 million that had any of those 3 HCFA codes. If we look at our data set a little more closely here, we can see that we have a column for total charges, and we have a column for total payments. And we also have a column for balance. What I'd like to do is I'd like to figure out everybody who's got an unusually high balance. But in order to do that, I have to calculate what the average balance is. ACL has a number of functions you can use to manipulate and assess the data. I use a little script that I've created called high standard deviation to go and look for just that, things that are unusually high standard deviations. This is an interactive script that I've created with dialog boxes so that I can ask the user for the field name and the table name, and they can set some parameters. So this is a good script that I can use over and over again on all kinds of different projects. And because it's an interactive script, it'll prompt the user for all the information needed. So this is a great way to write a script that will take a junior auditor through an entire auditing process simply by prompting them for the next steps. So if we take the master table, and I'm going to look at the balance field, the output table will default to that. And I'd like to see everything that's more than 2 standard deviations from the average bill. And we'll just let that run for a moment. Scripting is a logical next step for most auditors. Once they master the basics of ACL and they learn how to do things manually, it's a very easy step to go into the log, take the log items, assemble them into a short script, test it, and then use the script in the future instead of always doing it manually. So if we look at our standard deviation table, we can see there are 32,000 accounts out of the 1 million records, or 32,000 entries that could be deemed unusually high. This particular script not only calculates the average amount, a little under $9,000, the standard deviation is about 19,000, but I can also see if I rank these that I have some accounts that have very unusually high balances. This particular account has a balance of 38 times the average outstanding balance. So that was a very quick set of tests that you can apply on some healthcare data using ACL. Hope you found it useful. If you'd like any more information, please see acl.com or give us a call. Thank you.